Hi, my name is Victor Pacheco. I'm an artist. I live here in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I want to share some things with you in terms of my practice. Started as a kid who just liked to draw. You know, I remember as far back as high school, having a great art teacher that just kind of pointed me in this direction of like, here are some paints. Why don't you try and make some paintings? And what started me off was like this idea of having to paint myself, this sort of self-portraiture, and learning the material and stuff like that. And started with this idea that I was going to be a painter. I was really excited about this. This is kind of what I knew. Never had really any kind of experience with like 3D art. A lot of it, just looking back on some of my middle school kind of artworks, were pieces that were just kind of funny and I guess based off of things that I saw right on TV, like characters and like animation characters and stuff like that. Applied to undergrad school at a place called University of Hartford in Connecticut. And second year in, I think things changed quite a bit. I took a sculpture fundamentals 3D class, and just really loved how you could just make something. Right? I like the immediacy of it. This idea that you could just pick something up, cut it up, tape it, glue it, screw it, and then put it together in a different way. And there's this excitement to try and make things work, right? To kind of put things together, whether it's with glue, nails, screws, or just kind of fuse them together. And so I took that class and completely just said, you know what, this is what I want to do. I just want to put things together, and that's always been really fun. Thinking about different materials and how to put them together or carve them, assemble them, so that someone else can look at it and say, oh, like either what is that or is that this? It's my way of expressing myself, saying something, communicating. And so I make objects. I like to make things for people to think about. And so for the most part, they're things that I kind of really just deeply think about, things that I'm interested in. Anything that has to do with our environment, nature, its condition, our condition, right? Like what we're going through and stuff like that. And so I like to make objects that communicate either that feeling, that emotion, or how I'm feeling. I couldn't nail down this idea of doing the same thing over and over again. And so a lot of the projects I did were projects that were very different. Some of them were installation projects where I kind of installed sound and used some kind of video stuff to work with it. Other stuff just got into like exploring material, working with wood, plaster. Did a number of years doing bronze casting as well, which that was really super fun. Now I currently have a studio out of the basement and attic of the house that we live in. It's a relatively small studio, but it's got, over the years I've accumulated a lot of tools and made that work. Things that make me kind of go and make work are what's happening in the world. I mean, there's a lot of things that influence us, right, as people and the planet that we live on. And so those are things that I'm really heavily interested in, and I make work influenced by that. Things that are happening in the world, whether it be, the fires in California, or maybe what's happening with our water, right? And so I tend to pick topics, do a little bit of research, and then, think of a plan on how to communicate what I've learned, and make these sometimes pieces that kind of just are this imaginatory thing that exists, right? And so I kind of find that fun to be able to have a space to to just say, okay, I'm just gonna make this and see what happens. You know, for the most part, that's what does happen. You just kind of, you know, put something together and then get to practice how to do that with different materials. And so what I've done is I've collected a bunch of stuff here that I would find either in the recycle bin outside or just from materials that I no longer use at home. You will have a few tools that you can use to shape some of these materials. I've put them here on the right hand side for you to take a look at them. And you know, one of the things is the X-Acto. We have a small roll of this packing tape, some scissors, and then some sandpaper. And I'll go with sandpaper in a little bit. The other stuff, you know, the other things that I've gathered here, you know, can be found outside. I have a piece of tree branch that fell, and as the snow melted, you can kind of see it and surfaced, and so I picked it up and brought it inside. I have some packing material, something that came in a box protecting an object, and you know, there's several variations of foam, and so here, for example, are two kinds. This is kind of a squishy kind, and then this is what we're most familiar with, which is kind of like packing foam. Paper towel roll, the interior part of it, and so gathered that as well. A couple bottles here. Something else I thought was pretty interesting was just a plastic bag. Some other sort of plastic lid to something, and then some other things that I thought were interesting that I gathered as well. Some squishies, kind of cylindrical foam, an old film plastic canister, and an old bike tube, just because it has some interesting qualities to it. And so I have these. Some other things. This is just some kind of weird stuff. Sometimes if you take a walk after trash day in the afternoon or something like that, you'd find some things kind of just tossed about that the garbage truck either left behind, or just kind of things got toppled over a little bit on the street. There might be some other interesting objects that you can gather that can be part of the creation process. A lot of this takes a little bit of like imagination, and so what could we make with something, with materials like this? But for the most part, you can make anything with these items, and basically what I'm doing to start the creative process is I'm looking at the items and I'm trying to figure out what parts of these items lend themselves well to representing something I am familiar with, right? And so, and in some cases you're going to have to cut into these and shape them and move them around and experiment. But for the most part, a good way to start doing this is to look at what's here and then figure out, what does this look like to me? In terms of a prompt, something that might guide you to make something, our most sort of common thing to think about is the human figure, creating a figure. I like to think of things as what I'm interested in. And so right now, I'm thinking about like the figure as a starting point. So it could be anything. It could be sort of like a mask kind of thing. It could be a figure. So I'm going to start to cut some of these open. I'm going to take a couple minutes and clear this stuff away. That way I have an open space, to work out of. And when you start working on something, you want to prep things a little bit. All right, I think we're ready. Okay, so I have my two bottles here that I found interest in terms of starting. Sometimes it's okay not to know what you're making, and as you're making something, sometimes things will just kind of come up and then you'll have some direction. And so for me, I think sometimes it's okay to make things that are fun. So I'm just going to start cutting into this. I'm going to use my X-Acto. It seems to be, you know, and this is, you're going to find out soon that this is a bit exploratory, right? And so while I do have some sense of direction and how things work, sometimes things don't work. So you're probably going to see a bunch of errors happening here while I'm doing this. And that's part of the normal process of making something. And so quick note about your X-Actos. You know, these are dangerous tools. They are very sharp. You know, the point is very sharp. If you are going to be working with this, you know, quick tip, you know, don't do it in sandals or flip-flops. You know, put some shoes on. If this rolls off your table, it can easily puncture your foot. And so, you know, you want to be able to kind of protect yourself. And if you're making cuts, always keep the other hand away from the direction you're cutting. And so, you know, here I'm just going to hold this, place it down so it's comfortable. And then, you know, and I could probably use the scissors, but I'm looking for a particular shape. I'm thinking I'm going to cut this here. I'm just outlining where I'm going to cut. So I kind of like this whole area here. So I'm going to cut that out and see what happens. I'm also interested in the shape inside. And so I've marked a couple places that I thought were pretty neat to kind of cut out. I'm going to go ahead and cut out. So I'm pushing this down, keeping my hand away from a cutting path, and I'm, you know, treating this as a pencil, doing a puncture, and then kind of working with this as if it were a knife. So I'm moving it back and forth for it to cut the plastic. You know, yeah, just be careful. This could be something that's dangerous. And you, I don't know, you might feel different about it, but it's always to be, while you're doing something, it's always good to be cautious. So what I've done is I've made a score mark, and then I'm doing a second pass. And there it goes. So I got my first cut in, looks like that. And you know, I'm gonna go ahead and, oh, there's a little bit of water in there. I've rinsed these out, so you know, just gonna shape this a little bit, and then I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of this. I got almost there. Alright. And put my X-Acto down. You know, as I'm doing this, it's pretty good to just kind of take another look and see exactly what's happening with the form. Just gonna open this just to gotta see what's happening. And so right now this has become kind of an interesting shape. You know, maybe I don't need to separate it from that top, right? So I was envisioning, I don't know, when I was looking at this, that this would be some kind of arm or some kind of leg in terms of a shape. Right now it kind of looks like my finger, right? The shape of my finger. But I don't know, it might be something else. So I'm going to go ahead and keep cutting and switch over to these scissors. The cool thing about the scissors is that you can kind of use them to round things out a little bit. And then to shape things, I'm going to continue to make this cut. So right now, I mean, this is pretty neat. You have an interior shape, right? And you have an exterior shape. You know, so what do you do with this kind of shape? I tend to like it. I think it almost kind of mimics the shape of an instrument, some kind of horn here. You know, I cut this out already, so that's kind of gone. There's an interesting texture in here as well. That's part of the plastic and how it's formed. So I'm going to shape this pretty quickly, right there, and then. So I'm going to put this aside and do the other container. There might be some use for this as well. I mean, it's got a nice kind of like curvature in here. That's pretty neat. And this has some color as well. And so we can probably use sections of this as a surface treatment. So I'll put that aside, keep that there, and then start on this. And so, you know, just looking at the both of these, they can work as two eyes. Kind of liking the idea of creating a mask. Not for me to wear, obviously, but as an object. And so I'm going to round this stuff out a little bit. As I'm doing this, just take a look at the positioning of my hand and the scissors. Right, they're relatively close to my finger, and so, you know, as you're cutting, just keep an eye on that kind of situation. That way you don't get injured. Making something is always a risk to, you know, what you're using, the tools you're using, and so, all right, so we have that. And place these things like this. How would I attach these things? Is the question, right? And so one of the things to notice about plastics is they, you know, while they're matte in color, a lot of things don't adhere to them just because the surface they have either as a semi-gloss, which means that there's a sheen on the surface that doesn't allow adhesion. Packing tape is pretty good. It allows you to adhere things together without, you know, obviously you can probably peel some of the packing tape off, but here I'm just going to test this out and see what, you know, it's got some adhesion, but it can easily be peeled off. You know, the cool thing about packing tape is that's got a glossy surface, and so it changes the visual aesthetic of the surface if you're using a bunch of it. Here, if I wanted the packing tape to kind of stick a little more than it does, the best thing to do, and this is when we get into the sandpaper, is to, you know, rough up the surface a little bit. I went ahead and put this marker on there as if I was going to cut this. You know, in the ease of cutting it, I didn't come up and cut that part, and glad I didn't do that, just because I'm able to try and combine these together as I'm thinking about it. But in order for things to stick a little better, I'm going to grab one of the sandpaper sheets I have here, and, you know, I'm going to describe these a little bit for you. The sandpaper you have has numbers on the back. This one's 320, this one's 220, this one's 80, and these are all pieces of sandpaper that I have in the studio. This one's 100, you can barely make out that number. And what is this? And this is 150. So if I were to arrange these in a sequence of the lower number first, right? And then what comes next? 100. There, yeah, 80, 100. Got 150, 220, and 320. And so the difference between these numbers is the lower the number, the rougher the sandpaper. And so the more rough or the more scuff you're going to get out of it. So if I'm going to scuff this up a little bit, I'm using the 80 grit, right? And what'll happen is it'll remove some material, but it will also leave a bit of texture. And so I'm not sure if you're able to see that or not. And so it'll leave a little bit of a texture. This might not be that good for the packing tape. It might be too rough. So if I move up to about, let's try the 320, just over that to smoothen things out a little bit. Right. Then you're getting a smoother texture that's rough enough for the tape to adhere to, but not so rough that the tape has a hard time trying to grab on to the surface. So let's try this adhesive test again. And with packing tape, what you want to do is basically use your finger, either your fingernail or something else like this, to work the tape into the surface. Yeah. So right now I have two forms that I've taped together that have a little bit of flex to them. Two handles, right? So if I wanted to change the orientation of this, obviously you can do more than one piece of tape. You can do another piece of tape on the inside here. I actually like the way that looks. And so if we're looking at this and I do a pull test, the one without the sandpaper treatment comes off a little easier. Alright, so if I were to envision this as one item, right, I can also think about what's going to happen on this side. You know, you're getting me thinking here. I think these would function well as two shoes. Yeah. As part of a body. So I'm going to use them in that format. Alright, and one of these can be a body. I think that'll work. Alright, so what do I have here that can work as some legs? I think that could work as a leg. And I want two of these, so I'm going to just cut this in half. You know, you're going to have some challenges here with some of this, because structurally sometimes things don't hold up their end of the deal. So if I want this to be a leg, then you know, how's it going to stand? I might have to put something here for it to stand right. Yeah. And so I'm looking at it like that. So I'm going to, you know, tape this together just for the sake of taping it together. Good. And so, got one leg. And now I'm going to do the other. So, you know, the creative process is not something that happens immediately or fast. Things are unpredictable. They don't, you know, when you see a finished piece, like the slides I showed you earlier, those are not things that happened, you know, one day to the next. One of those pieces probably takes me 2 to 3 weeks to complete, right? And so, you know, this that we're doing here as an intro to kind of work with the material, this seems to work out pretty good, right? It's just sort of, you know, it's exploratory, and it's like, okay, let's find out what we're doing. I'm going to clean this out really quickly, and then see how we can get an attachment going here. Alright, so I have an opening in here. I'm going to just double cut this and create a little bit of an opening so that I don't force the material through here and make it so that it makes the material a little more fragile than it should be. So I'm envisioning that if I fold this piece Oh, like this. Then I can put this in here like that, and it's still not big enough, I think. Alright, there you go. So now we have, and this is a bit of a funny character in some ways, right? It's got these two big boots here. They're not the same color. Right. So I'm thinking you get the idea, right? This is, you know, this process of making things is not, right? Ooh, perfect example of how to cut yourself. It's not an easy thing, but it takes a little bit of fooling around and playing, and you know, you can get some interesting effects with this. So I have, you know, just looking at like materials I have and color coordination here, just aesthetically thinking about things. You know, if I have a red boot and a white boot and a white body, might be interesting to put in this, you know, as a head, maybe, right? And so how do I do that? And so I'm going to start to pre-think about this a little bit and think about arms. You know, I do have some other things that could make this work a little bit. That looks pretty neat, right? So I'll think about that. And I'm missing arms. Now, you know, the question is, does my form need arms, right? Maybe you don't need arms. Maybe this form is, you know, this form that doesn't need arms. And so, things to think about. You know, one thing I have here that can work with the arms is this, you know, this bike tube, right? So if I got this per se, and it gets attached somewhere like that, you know, then I can do that, right? So I'm gonna cut, and this, you know, I'm just guessing, right? Make the other one the same size. Oh, you can see the powder come out of the inside of that. Okay. So I got two arms I'm kind of fooling around with. Okay. I got those. Now, you know, the question is, how am I going to attach these? Am I going to use the same approach as I did with the legs? Right? Okay. Let's try that. I mean, not losing anything by trying that. And thinking about positioning and like emotional, like the description of what a body or a gesture might feel like. Right? So if I put these down like this, you know, they're not that exciting. You know, if I do this, it means that there's motion going on and the arm is kind of moved to the side, right? This in turn is kind of tired feeling. And so you want to start to think about like how the positioning of your items is going to affect a greater, you know, what happens if it's attached like this naturally, right? It's kind of an awkward position. So not only one, but two. This is more like a stiff dance, right? You're moving your arms to the right, crossing the arms. You know, these are all kind of interesting notions. I think with this, you know, we can do this all day and trying to figure stuff out. You're just kind of seeing the thinking process a little bit. And there's always a way to refine things. And so a lot of this can be very comical in some ways. Right now my form doesn't stand up on its own. If I were to do that, and you know, camera's angle, it's a little off. So I'm going to utilize my ideas here, and if I were to place a piece of foam on the inside of this, maybe height adjusted, if I'm looking at this, right? I cut a piece I can probably get this to stand. You know, and like I can think back and say, well, if I didn't cut this part of the bottle, I could have had two perfectly stable boots, right? But I didn't do that. I thought that these forms that I was cutting out was going to be for a different thing, and things changed, and now we have this stabilization challenge. So I'm going to take a measurement, and I'm also guessing some of this is not as exact as it should be, and get an idea that I need to cut that there. All right, let's solidify these things. Let me see. All right, so that stands upright, kind of looks like that. Good. And let's fiddle around with some arms. So in reviewing all of this, yeah, you know, what you make is not going to be something that happens very fast. There has to be some kind of process where you get to know your materials a little bit, and you start to imagine different things, and so things might change as you're working with them. My challenge to you is to try and make something fun. Make something that you enjoy, make something that's funny maybe. Could be figurative, could be abstract, could be your thought of like a magical creature or something like that. But with your materials, I think what's really exciting about working with different materials is as you start working with them, things start to happen, and then you might have a general idea, and as you start to fool around with it some more, things change. And then, you know, at some point you'll have some clarity as to what you're making. You're also going to have many challenges as to how to put things together. And so in the rough, basically, you know, things, depending on how you feel about things looking rough or textured or something like that, could be part of the character of the object that you're making. And so that's what I have for you in terms of thoughts. I would say if you're going to make something fun. And, you know, give it a chance. It might be a little difficult at first, you know, but you know, things start to take shape after you fool around with things for a little while. You know, and the last thing I leave with is, you know, be careful. The X-Acto knives are pretty sharp. Happy sculpting!